This is Steve Neczypor, host of the Legends of Boathouse Row podcast, where you will meet some of the men and women whose hard work and dedication have made this section of Philadelphia's Schuylkill River the center of rowing in the United States. Today, I'm speaking with John Hartigan. John was a coxswain at the University of Pennsylvania, graduating in 1963. In his junior year, he coxed the Penn 8 to the Eastern Sprint Championship, which they shared with Yale. He served as coxswain for the U.S. Coxed Fours at the 1968 and 1976 Olympics. Hartigan also competed at the 1979 and 1983 Pan American Games, winning a bronze medal in coxed fours in 1979 and a gold medal in 1983. In 1974, Hartigan coxed the U.S. Lightweight 8 that won the inaugural World Championship in that event. He continued to compete for many years, coxing at the 1986 Worlds in the Lightweight 8s. He is a renowned raconteur of Boathouse Row lore, and it's a real honor to have John on the program. John, thank you so much.
My pleasure, and I'm delighted to talk to you and recount some of these old things and some of the great people I've rowed with.
Well, thank you so much. Tell me about your childhood. You're a Chicagoan originally.
Yeah, I am originally from Chicago. Actually, I was born in Minnesota, but we lived in Chicago, which was the hometown of my parents. And because of some physical issues I've had to deal with, I love sports. I really love sports. But I wasn't able to play football, or I wasn't able to play baseball or anything like that. I was a manager of the baseball team in high school, and I was a manager of the football team also. So it was a way of sort of imparting to me getting involved with sports. So anyway, I then applied for college, and I was lucky to be accepted at the University of Pennsylvania. So I remember my mother said, well, with your love of sports, John, maybe you can go out for rowing, be a coxswain. Be a coxswain? I said, what does that entail? And what I'd always dealt with in my life was if I wanted to play football, I was too slow and too small. I had a great voice, but I couldn't use it for anything. So I go to the University of Pennsylvania, and at that time what they used to do was you had to take a physical. So I went over to get my physical, and I'm there, and all of a sudden the coach comes up, Joe Burke. Joe Burke, the renowned world champion coach that he was, naval hero and everything. And he saw me, and I was doing some of the exercises that you had to do to pass a physical test. He said, you're pretty good. He says, you know what? How about trying to be a coxswain? So I thought to myself, okay, I'll try it. My freshman year, I went out to be a coxswain. And at that time, I was one of 12 coxswains. You know, every short guy in the University of Pennsylvania freshman class came out to be a coxswain. Well, I tried out, and I think I was ranked number 12.
How did they rank you, by the way? How did they?
I just noticed that there were other coxswains that were getting the best boats in the freshman team, and I'd get a boat when there was some time available, or a boat was available. Well, about 6 months into the year, basically in February, that number of 12 coxswains was down to 6. I talked with the guys. I said, well, why'd you quit? He says, I don't like those oarsmen. I don't like those oarsmen yelling at me and everything. And I thought to myself, being from the south side of Chicago, where yelling is a big thing, I thought, hey, that doesn't bother me. I'll scream back at him. You know what I mean? And I did, Hey, idiot, put that oar in the water and get it done right.
You were not intimidated.
I wasn't intimidated, but I was still like the fifth boat coxswain. So anyway, go through the freshman year, and I got one race. And that sophomore year, I go out, and there are no coxswains from the varsity squad that came out. Well, the reason was, and I later found out, some of those coxswains figured that there wasn't going to be anybody to compete with them, so they would come out in the spring. So lo and behold, I got on the varsity squad, but I was sort of like the pickup coxswain, take all the different boats. So I really worked hard and got into it and everything. And I thought, hey, I'm doing well at this, Well, then all of a sudden, spring comes, and all of these experienced coxswains come back out, Well, in the space of about 2 hours, I went from coxing the number 1 boat to coxing the 10th boat. Anyway, I was pretty disappointed, and I was pretty upset. So what did I do? We got to the end of the sophomore year, and I went up to Coach Burke, and I said, Coach, can I talk to you a minute? I said, as you know, I came out here all motivated and everything, and I said, I understand these coxswains were better than me. And I said, I really went from being the one coxswain that everybody was using to take them out during the winter, during the winter and the ice and the snow and everything. And now, all of a sudden, I'm no longer. I got bounced. And I said, is there any point with me continuing with this sport? Do I really want to do that? And he said, oh, no, come on out. Things will be different next year. So I go out my junior year. All of a sudden, we had some really stellar guys. One of them was Frank Shields. Frank Shields was the son of Francis X. Shields, I think, who was a famous tenor star during like the 1930s, 1940s. He was just a great guy, big, tall guy. He was basically what ended up being the captain of the crew in his senior year. But we had a whole series of talented oarsmen. So all of a sudden the coach decides some of those guys that had not come out for the beginning of the year went to the coach and said, we'd like to come out now. He said, no, if you weren't here at the beginning of the year, you're not going to cox any boats. I've got coxswains here, including Hartigan and some of these other guys, and they're going to be the coxswains, come hell or high water, which was great. I thought it was really fabulous, So lo and behold, we put together an 8, and it's a fast 8. Big, beautiful, outstanding 8. Okay. And Frank Shields is the 6th man. He loved to taunt me, beat me up, and he'd laugh like heck because I would then give it back to him.
Do you remember an exchange?
We would be funny. It would start out like, hey, Hartigan, are you going to learn to steer right? And I'd say, hey, Shields, when you learn to row right. And he'd laugh. He'd laugh. He said, good retort. So we went out and we put together this boat. We had an outstanding stroke and a guy named Woody Fisher. I learned that I'm going to be the coxswain of the varsity 8 in my junior year. And the first race was the Child's Cup up in New York. Well, I thought to myself, boy, this is going to be fantastic. So my parents called from Chicago, said, we're coming in. We want to see you row, So here it is. It's my first time, and I'm so delighted. I'm fantastic. I'm in the varsity 8. The first time in sports that I've become varsity. So they say, coach says, what I want you to do is go out and just put the boat together, take a few strokes. So we get in the boat, and we go out, and we're doing starts, which are fast strokes to get the boat moving. And all of a sudden, we go boom, 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 really hard.
This is in the East River.
This is in the East River. Yeah, and I said, what happened? And then Charlie Eddy, who was in the bows, turns around and says, Hartigan, you're not going to like this, but you just put a big hole in the front of the boat. Hartigan, you did this. My heart sank. I thought to myself, oh, my God, I've hit something. And lo and behold, as we moved further by it, it was a refrigerator with the door open. It was floating in the water, and I'd hit that corner door, tore a big hole in the front of the boat. So all the guys in the boat say, well, Hartigan, you're done. You're through, And I thought to myself, and my parents are here. They want to see the first race. They want to see what it's like, You
had no retort for that one.
I had no retort, and I was so depressed. So we get back to the dock, barely, with water in the boat. Woody Fisher says to me, John, you got to go up and tell the coach about this. I went, oh, no. No, please, no. No. He says, yeah, you got to tell him, because basically you steered into it. Then no break, You cannot see directly in front of yourself in the coxswain seat. You see to the side, and you see to the left. And in front of you is a hulking body and 8 other bodies. So you have a blind spot.
So now you have to go tell Joe Burke.
Anyway, yeah, so the Columbia Boathouse was a multi-level thing. So I had to go up like 15 or 16 steps, which reminded me of a gallows. Okay. I thought, this is going to be terrible. They won't let me on the bus to go home. My parents are going to see this. Oh, this is terrible. So I get up. I see Joe, and I go over to him and said, Coach, could I see you a moment? And he says, okay, what's the problem? I said, we hit something. I said, no, I hit something. We have damage in the front of the boat. He says, well, get Wayne, who was the guy that traveled with us, the mechanic, I call him. He says, get him to put some tape on it. We'll be fine. And I turn to him and I say, Coach, there's not enough tape in the world to fix this hole. And he says, oh. So he goes down and takes a look at it. And the front of the boat, we had brought it in. It's basically about a 7-foot hole, and it's filled with water. We got back, everybody was wet, all that sort of stuff. So he says, okay. He looks at me and I thought, I was going to get, thank you, John, for coming with us, but you're through. He looks at it and he says, get the crew together and tell them you use the JV boat. And I thought to myself, wait a minute. Oh, my God. I'm not being thrown out of the squad. He told me to do it. Okay.
Didn't lose his temper at all.
No, he never lost his temper. He was controlled. He had been a PT boat captain during the Second World War. And if anybody knew anything about life, it was him. He was also, I think, a world sculling champion. But he acted like a champion. Said, don't worry about it. So lo and behold, we used the JV boat. So we're about to race, and they said, okay, Hartigan, don't screw this up. They used another word. And I'm sitting there, and we start the race. Well, it was 3 boats. We were on the outside, on the far starboard, lane 1, then Columbia, and then Princeton. Okay. So we're racing on the Harlem River, and we go off, and all of a sudden, I really got motivated. And I said, all right, you rats, move this boat, okay? And I really got loud. And all of a sudden, the boat picked up, and it just really moved, okay? And I just tore into him. Give me 10, man. I want another seat. And all of a sudden, the boat's leaping out in front, and we win. And I said, Shields, you were even good. And he says, I can't use the words that we. He says, you were even good. And I was so ecstatic because my parents saw us win. The coach saw us win. And I basically continued as the coxswain. The next week we raced Yale. Unfortunately, we lost. But then we raced Navy and Harvard. The following week after that, beat them. And then we went to the Eastern Sprints. And for the first time, we tied with Yale. So it was at one moment, it was the worst of times and the best of times. And I sort of got my mojo there. Okay, you want to race? This is what we're going to do.
I was about to say, was this the transformative moment where you were just only not so long before, thought, I'm going to quit this sport. This is not right for me. And then
I thought I was going to be thrown off. But it wasn't. But I said, hey, I've got a future in this. And that's what I did.
And just to note that Frank Shields ended up being the father of Brooke Shields.
Brooke Shields. In fact, I remember seeing her as a baby at one of the races.
Tell me more about Joe Burke. He was one of the great legends. He became a sculling champion by practicing on a creek in South Jersey. He was a very understated man. What about him was so legendary? What were some of his secrets as a coach, and how did he motivate you? Aside from the refrigerator story, what are some techniques he did?
The question is the way he motivated everybody. He was a leader. He was able to talk to you logically, never lost his temper. He was just so respected by the crew. It was his demeanor. He just inspired everybody. The way he treated everybody as athletes. Nobody got upset if they were moved out of the boat or moved into the JV. It was almost like they understood that Joe would only do that if it was completely necessary. And then he hired Ted Nash as his freshman coach. And Ted was a little bit more boisterous, but at the same time, he had that very strong professional approach to teaching oarsmen how to row. Ted turned everything around at Penn. He became an unbelievable championship coach. And many of the guys that I ended up rowing on the Olympic team with had been trained by Ted.
Tell me about the journey to the 68 Olympics. You graduated from Penn in 1963. Yeah. What was your path after that? And you had graduated on an absolute high. You loved coxing. How did you get
involved in? Okay. First of all, a major thing happened. Joe Burke had coxed the University of Pennsylvania 8, and they were superb. They won everything that year. At the same time, Harvard, coached by Harry Parker, was also superior. And they went out to Long Beach for the Olympic trials. And what happened is it came down to Harvard racing Penn. And Harvard nipped Penn and became the Olympic 8 in 1968. Well, what happened then was all of the Penn oarsmen came back, and the majority of them decided that what they wanted to do was to try and make the team in other boats. So Ted Nash, he basically worked to put together some entries from the University of Pennsylvania. And one of them was a four-width. Luther Jones was stroke, Bill Purdy at 3, Tony Martin, I think, was at 2, and Gardner Cadwallader was the bowman. So it was really a very strong four-width made up entirely of championship Penn oarsmen. So anyway, I went over there to Cox. What happened was there was the NAAO championships up in New York, and we raced Vesper, and we won. So what they decided to do was they sent us out to Long Beach, where we raced for the spot on the Olympic trials, and we won.
Sweet revenge.
Sweet revenge. It was just fantastic that we became the four-width in the Olympics representing the United States, and it was all Penn grads.
So tell me about after you won those trials, what about the journey to Mexico City?
Journey to Mexico City was fantastic. What we had to do was they were concerned about the altitude. Okay. So we went out to Gunnison, Colorado to train in the altitude. And it was, at 5,000 feet. So we were out there for approximately 5 weeks. We were with Harry Parker, but we were pretty much on our own. But Ted came to the Olympics, and it was such a wonderful time when we were sitting now out in front of the boathouse, and all of a sudden this figure starts walking towards us, and it was Ted Nash. It was outstanding. And we say, he's here, and he helped train us.
And could you imagine you had, considering when you started at Penn, you were worried you were going to get cut, and when you arrived at the Olympics, I mean, that's quite a journey.
No, it's an unbelievable journey, and we were so happy. And to put on that American shirt representing the country, it's outstanding. And you have the red, white, and blue oars.
So tell me about that race. What do you remember from that race?
Well, actually, going into the final, we raced and we came in 5th, but we were only about a second out of 3rd place. We beat the Russians, and it was great, From that standpoint, we were sad. We had thought we could win a medal, and we almost won a bronze medal, but unfortunately, it didn't happen.
I'm sure it was disappointing that you didn't end up getting a medal, but at least you beat the Russians and you got your taste of the Olympics. You made it to the Olympics, which was incredible, and you ended up making it again to the 1976 Olympics in Montreal. Tell me about that journey, and what were you doing professionally? So you graduated from Penn in 1963. What were you doing after graduating? How did you balance this intense training with your professional career?
Well, the intense training was basically I lived near the boathouse. I lived up in near Chestnut Hill. So that's basically what permitted me to continue trying out. And my wife, who I married in 1969, was extremely cooperative and very nice.
I was going to ask how
to do it. She realized that she said, well, at least it's not golf.
And so tell me about the journey to the 76 Olympics.
This is a continuation of my career of being on the edge. And I'll explain how. 1976, what I had been doing was rowing at Vesper Boat Club. The camp for the men's four-width had been designated to be Vesper Boat Club. We had been there, and somewhere around June 15th, some oarsmen showed up from Harvard, and a coxswain showed up from Harvard after we had been there practicing. The situation developed that we were practicing against these other crews, and I had been there with four guys, namely Bob Zagunis, Pat Hayes, Mike Plum, and Fred Borschelt. Well, all of a sudden they make a choice for the boat that'll represent the team at the trials, and it's not us. The coaches had looked around and said, we think that they will be the better boat.
Harvard ruined the party.
Harvard, I guess you could say that. Harvard ruined the party. But we were all devastated, you know. Enter our old friend, Ted Nash. So we went over to see Ted Nash, and we said, look, would you be interested in helping us? We'd like to still go to the trials as a four-width. He said, sure. So anyway, so for the 1 week before the trials, we started to practice over at the Penn Boathouse with Ted Nash directing us. So we go up to Princeton for the four-width trials. We get set up and everything. Bob Zagunis was the stroke, and we line up for the trial. And there were four boats in it, which included Harvard, plus the Vesper boat that had been chosen to be the four-width entry. But they had to race to prove they were the best. We get up to the starting line. The ref calls the race, and we go off. But we go off kind of slow. We weren't as high as we should. So Pat Hayes says to Zagunis, look, you got to take it up. You got to get it going. You got to do it. We got to do it better. So we line up again after the initial race was called. So we line up again, and we go off. This time, we went off like a bat out of Hades. That boat went so fast, it threw me against the back of the boat, and I was holding on. So all of a sudden, we jump out on the field by a deck length, okay, with Vesper, the designated crew, on our port side and Harvard on our right. And I could look up on the shore, and I could see Ted Nash riding a bicycle going along. And he's got the biggest smile on his face because we were really churning. And I said, let's do this for Ted. Give me 10, you know. So, I mean, these guys put out like they had never put out before. I mean, it was an unbelievable situation. We get to the finish line, and we won. I got berserk. I jumped out of the boat. I walked down I pulled myself down the boat. I said, outstanding. How did you do it? You know, everybody did such a fantastic event. And we were the designated Olympic four in the 76 Olympics.
After people said you couldn't do it.
I couldn't do it. I can't believe that I've had so many events in rowing where they seemed like the pits. And then 5 minutes later, it turns out to be a championship race. I've been so lucky. And the guys I've rowed with, I've been so lucky.
And tell me about the 76 Olympics, the journey to Montreal, and who were you afraid of when you showed up in Montreal?
Well, we were afraid of the Russians. I think New Zealand. New Zealand had an outstanding four, and we ended up in the second tier, you know, of finalists. But our greatest race was that heat. I think we did a very credible job at the Olympics because the four-width is one of the most difficult boats in terms of competing. I don't believe it's in the Olympics anymore because things have changed with women and restructuring everything.
And that was the first year the women were in the Olympics, by the way, for rowing.
That was the first year the women were in the Olympics. And the American women's team did very well.
Well, tell me a bit more about your racing career. You were in the Pan American Games. Any memories from those two?
Well, the Pan Am team, the first Pan Am team I was on was in 1975. It was a boat that was an 8, coached by Al Rosenberg. Al Rosenberg was an outstanding coach. He coached the 8 in the 75 Pan Am Games, and we won. I never forget that race. We had the Cubans next to us. Cuba si, Yankee no. Cuba si, Yankee no. So that got me kind of mad. I said, okay, do you want this to happen, guys? If not, give me 10. And they said, no. And all of a sudden that 8 lifted up out of the water, and we went by them like a bat out of hell. It was great. 1975.
Well, tell me about your looking at the Boathouse Row community now. Rowing has just expanded so much since you first got involved in the early 60s, or it has now become part of broader American popular culture with the boys in the boat. You have, I believe, almost parity with men and women on Boathouse Row. You're looking at the expansion of college teams, high school teams. Yeah. If you were to look at coxswains today, what sort of advice would you give young coxswains who are just getting started out as sort of the dean of Philadelphia's coxswains?
I wouldn't say I'm the dean. I would say I'm an experienced coxswain. I realized that when you talk to an oarsman, you have to be constructive. And if somebody was, for example, needed to get their legs on quicker or something like that, do it in sort of a friendly tone. Hey, Charlie, you got the biggest legs in the boathouse. Get them down a little quicker. That's a better way of saying it than, hey, stupid, get your legs faster. I was fortunate that I had a very loud and distinctive voice, and I could get the point across.
Without humiliating someone.
Without humiliating, yeah. But keep it light when it's appropriate. I'm not saying, make jokes out of everything. But remember your audience, and people are sensitive. You have to be able to show that you know what's going on and that you're the eyes and ears and feelings of the boat. That's what you got to do. And you got to show that you're competent. You can't run into refrigerators. Yeah.
Have you ever run into anything else in your career?
No, I've been fortunate in that I have hit some things, but they've been relatively small. And it's a great sport. It was a great sport for me because all of my physical nature worked to being a coxswain. I'm short, I was light, and I have a booming voice. That's all I needed to do. I was very lucky, and it was just a real pleasure.
Let me ask you one final question. This came up in an interview with Jim Barker. Yeah. This is a sport that demands the utmost discipline, hard work, physical and mental punishment. Yeah. But say compared to baseball, football, it doesn't have as big an audience. You don't have all the glory. You don't have all the money. Why do people do it? And Jim Barker's response was, if I knew the answer, I'd be a very rich man. Why do you think people do it?
I think people do it because they start out and they're rowing. And what it does is it builds a team. I think that's why they do it. It's a feeling. And I got that feeling too, that I was so glad, and that there were coaches that I had that instilled that team spirit. Ted Nash, even Dietrich Rose to a certain extent, Harry Parker, great men,
Understated men.
Joe Burke, understated men, Rowing is a classic sport. It's got something about it where the person is not thinking so much about themselves. That's what rowing is. And I felt great about it. I mean, I was a coxswain, and every boat I was in, I felt really happy about it. They were all great guys. and they went on to do things in their life, and you bump into them and they'll say, hey, remember the time we did this? Remember that? And rowing's a big part of their life. It's wonderful.
You still are part of this wonderful community of Boathouse Row.
Yes, I definitely am. I've been dealing with some physical issues, but I hope to get back there. That's what I want to do.
Well, John, thank you so much for your time. This is Steve Neczypor with the Legends of Boathouse Row podcast interviewing John Hartigan. John, thank you.
Thank you very much. If I ever have you in a boat, I'll talk to you.
Thank you.